Did you applause for you, the kids? I didn't see that. Did you applause for you? Okay. Just checking it.
They're still awake. Mr. General Evaluator, fellow members, most welcome guests, and especially Dari, whom I've known for a good 9 years now. I have 425 points to cover in the next 4 minutes. Just kidding. Just kidding. We're not going to do that. But what I do want to talk about in this incredible speech, let me unpack this speech a little bit, because there's a lot here. Dari's a very experienced speaker, and her goal tonight was to give us tips and strategies to make our table topics experience a lot more palatable. And I think she delivered, you might agree, she delivered on every front imaginable, because table topics at the surface seems very simple, but yet if you have no strategies to do it, it's just this like empty palette. You don't know how to fill it. And I think the most successful part of the speech was bringing this down to earth, that even if you're scared of it, there's 100 different strategies you can use, different ways to tell a story, different tips that you can use, different ways to start it, reframing, whatever it was, that makes it that much more easy to really grab onto something and not be like, oh my God, like a deer in the headlights. On that front, I thought it was wildly successful, and I think, Dari, I really commend you for that, because it's a hard thing to do, to put a speech together that is so informative like this. And what I thought was interesting is, here's the structure she used. This is also a learning experience. She gave a rousing intro, which you would expect from Dari every time, but I feel like she pulled out every stop in terms of technique, because some of the things she talked about, for example, were the best auditions happen in a car ride. It's a great analogy to start off with, in and of itself, table topics or not. We come to table topics to be public speakers. And when she did that, to be public speaker, she moved her feet by the syllables. It's always talked about moving your body. She literally moved her body to the syllables she was using, sinking lower into your speech. This is a technique I've seen her use before. So there was a lot of stuff to learn beyond table topics, even for your speeches and body language and vocal variety that were in this speech, which I thought were wonderful. And it was such a great setup for the do's and don'ts, which was the next section. And the do's and don'ts were wonderful. The one thing I would change in the do's and don'ts to turn this around a little bit, because there's a couple things you could do better, and I felt that there were so many do's and don'ts. So many, and they were wonderful. I can't remember more than 2 or 3 of them, even when you asked us to raise our hands at the end, and Johnny gave me the one that we were all thinking of, thank you. What I would recommend for that is one of 2 things. Because something happened in the middle of the speech about halfway through that section that I sort of realized. I felt like the energy kind of started to drift a little bit, because there were so many of them. Either write them on the board, high school teacher style, because you were standing in front of the lectern, so we can follow along, or have a handout that you tell us about at the beginning of the speech that you will offer to give us at the end, which is something that we could do perhaps anyway, because I don't want this information to be lost. This could be a blog post, and I may go over on this handsheet, because I think this is important. This could be a blog post that you and I collaborate on, or something to that effect that we add to the knowledge of the club. The other part that dovetails with the lectern is that you're a speaker who typically does away with the lectern, and you freely use the room, very famously, in terms of where you stand. What I felt is that you were in a little bit of conflict where your body was. You were walking around at some points, and at some points you were behind the lectern, and I felt you were a little uncomfortable behind the lectern. You were kind of wanting to move, because that's what you do best. So I felt there was a little bit of conflict between how you physically deliver the speech. So perhaps pick one or the other, within reason. You don't have to stand in one place all the time, but because it was a little bit away from how you typically give speeches. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that I wanted to say as a positive part of it, which was amazing, is that oftentimes when we have someone read a bio for us, the bio either has nothing to do with what we're about to talk about, or it's confusing and it's too detailed and it's a jumble. I thought the bio that Lee read for Dari's speech was wonderful, because it set up perfectly what the speech was about, and it set up the promise. She's going to talk about tips and strategies for you to gain clarity on table topics. And then she did exactly that. So you knew what she was going to do, and she delivered on it. And that's really, because the bio sets up the speech. It's actually part of the speech. It isn't just, let's talk about how cool the day is or whatever, and then I'd launch into something about rocket science. It's very tempting to write clever titles and clever bios, but it's even better to have it actually match what you're talking about into the speech. And you delivered on that very well, because we all knew what it was about, and we ended up being given that promise. Good speech, I enjoyed it, and I would love to see, I will collaborate with you on that if you'd like, so that the whole group here can benefit from all the tips and strategies that you gave us, because it was really wonderful and so well researched. Mr. General Evaluator.